There's something most people spend their entire lives chasing without ever really understanding what they're running toward. They wake up every day believing that if they just work a little harder, make a little more, or climb one more rung on the ladder, everything will finally click into place. But here's the uncomfortable truth that nobody wants to hear. The wealthiest people in history didn't get there by chasing. They got there by waiting. They got there by thinking differently about time itself, and most importantly, they got there by refusing to play the games that everyone else was losing. When you strip away all the noise and complexity surrounding wealth building, you're left with a handful of principles so simple that they almost feel insulting to mention. Yet these same principles remain almost universally ignored, not because people don't know them, but because following them requires a level of discipline that feels unbearable in a world obsessed with instant results. The uncomfortable reality is that building lasting wealth has nothing to do with intelligence and everything to do with behavior. You can have a genius-level understanding of markets and still end up broke if your behavior doesn't align with reality. Let's start with the concept that might be the hardest pill to swallow. Intelligence alone is not your ticket to financial success. History is littered with brilliant minds who died penniless while people of average intellect built generational wealth. The difference wasn't brain power. It was the ability to recognize which battles were worth fighting and which games were rigged from the start. Real financial wisdom isn't about knowing everything, it's about knowing what to avoid. Think about that for a moment. The most successful wealth builders in history didn't win because they made every right decision. They won because they systematically avoided making catastrophic wrong decisions. They studied failure patterns. They looked at where others went bankrupt and made sure their own lives were structured to avoid those same traps. This idea runs completely counter to how most people think about success. We're taught to focus on what we should do, which opportunities to chase, which investments to make. But the truly transformative question is the opposite. What should I absolutely refuse to do? What patterns of financial self-destruction should I avoid at all costs? When you start thinking this way, everything changes. You stop seeing the financial world as a race to grab as much as possible and start seeing it as a minefield where survival itself is the strategy. Now let's talk about the single most valuable resource you possess, and it's not money, it's time. Specifically, it's the compounding effect of time when paired with patience. The wealthiest individuals understand something profound about patience that most people never grasp. Patience isn't passive. It's not sitting around hoping things work out. Real patience is active discipline. It's the ability to find something genuinely valuable and then resist every temptation to mess with it. The big wealth isn't made in the frantic buying and selling. It's made in the decades of doing absolutely nothing. Think about how counterintuitive this is. Every instinct you have as a young person tells you to take action, to make moves, to prove yourself. But the mathematics of compounding doesn't care about your need to feel productive. Compounding rewards stillness. It rewards the person who can sit quietly while everyone else is panicking or celebrating. The person who understands that decades of steady growth will always outperform years of frantic activity. This is why young people struggle so much with this concept. When you're in your 20s or 30s, waiting feels like dying. Every year feels like an eternity. But by the time you've lived through enough cycles to understand how compounding actually works, you've already burned through precious years that can never be recovered. Here's the brutal truth about timelines. Whatever you think is realistic, you're probably wrong by a factor of 3. Want to build serious wealth by 30? You're more likely looking at 45 or 50. Want to master your field in 5 years? Plan for 15 or 20. This isn't pessimism, this is reality. Real compounding, the kind that fundamentally changes your financial position, doesn't happen in months or even years. It happens across decades. And the younger you accept this, the more time you give yourself to actually benefit from it. Let's shift to something that sounds almost too obvious to mention, but remains one of the biggest wealth killers: lifestyle inflation. Here's what most people don't understand about money. It's not about earning more, it's about needing less. This sounds like a cliché until you actually watch it play out across decades. People increase their income and immediately increase their spending to match. They move into bigger houses, buy fancier cars, upgrade their entire lives, and then discover they're no better off than before. They're just running faster on the same treadmill. The secret to actual financial freedom isn't making millions. It's figuring out what enough looks like and then stopping. The problem is that our culture has no concept of enough. There's always something bigger, better, newer. And the moment your expenses rise to meet your income, you've lost. You're back to living paycheck to paycheck, just with bigger numbers. The real power comes from creating a gap between what you earn and what you spend, and then protecting that gap like your life depends on it. Because in many ways, it does. That gap is where freedom lives. That gap is where you make decisions based on what's right rather than what's urgent. That gap is where wealth actually accumulates instead of just passing through your hands. People look at billionaires and wonder why they don't live more extravagantly. The answer is simpler than you think. Past a certain point, more stuff doesn't create more happiness. It creates more complexity, more maintenance, more decisions, more problems. Every upgrade you make to your lifestyle comes with hidden costs that go far beyond the purchase price. Bigger houses mean more upkeep. Fancier cars mean more stress about where you park them. More possessions mean more things to worry about, protect, and maintain. The truly wealthy understand that simplicity is not deprivation, it's liberation. Now let's talk about something that might be the most important wealth-building principle of all: continuous learning. The world doesn't stay still. What worked 20 years ago doesn't work today. What works today won't work 20 years from now. Markets evolve, technology changes, consumer behavior shifts, and if you stop learning, you become obsolete. Not immediately, not obviously, but gradually your knowledge becomes less relevant, your judgment becomes less reliable, and your decisions become less effective. The real power of learning isn't just accumulating information, it's updating your thinking when you're wrong. It's challenging beliefs you've held for years because new evidence suggests a different conclusion. Most people can't do this. They get attached to ideas and defend them, even when reality says otherwise. But the ability to say I was wrong, here's what I learned, here's how I'll think differently, is one of the most valuable skills you can develop. Education doesn't end when you finish school. It doesn't end when you land your first job or your first promotion. It never ends. Every single day should leave you slightly wiser than you were when it started. Here's something powerful that most people miss. Learning across different fields creates insights that specialists can never see. When you study psychology, history, biology, physics, and economics, you start recognizing patterns that cross disciplines. You start seeing connections that others miss. This is where real breakthroughs happen. Not from going deeper and deeper into one narrow specialty, but from understanding fundamental principles that apply across multiple domains. This creates a framework for thinking that makes complex problems suddenly seem simple. You start seeing the same patterns repeating in different contexts, and your decision-making becomes almost intuitive. Let's address something uncomfortable. Mistakes. You're going to make them. Lots of them. And that's not a problem unless you refuse to learn from them. The most expensive education you'll ever receive is the education you buy through your own failures. Every mistake you make, if you extract the lesson, is an investment in better judgment. The goal isn't perfection. The goal is making mistakes you can afford and then never repeating them. Here's where most people go wrong. They make a mistake and immediately try to forget it. Their ego can't handle the discomfort of being wrong, so they rationalize it away or blame external factors. This is financial suicide. If you can't look at your failures honestly, if you can't dissect exactly where you went wrong and why, you're condemned to repeat those same failures over and over. The most successful wealth builders do something that seems almost masochistic. They review their mistakes regularly. They write them down. They analyze them. They turn failures into case studies that inform future decisions. There's another category of mistakes that's even more costly. The opportunities you missed. The investments you should have made but didn't. The businesses you should have started but were too afraid to try. These mistakes of omission can cost you far more than mistakes of action, but they're harder to recognize because there's no immediate pain. You only realize what you lost years later when you see what could have been. The lesson here is that playing it too safe has its own costs. Refusing to take any risk is itself a risk. Now let's talk about relationships, because this might be the most overlooked aspect of building wealth. The people you surround yourself with will shape your thinking, your behavior, and ultimately your outcomes more than almost any other factor. You literally become like the people you spend time with. This isn't motivation speaking, this is observable reality. If you surround yourself with people who make excuses, you'll make excuses. If you surround yourself with people who think short-term, you'll think short-term. If you surround yourself with people who are always chasing the next shiny object, you'll never develop the patience that wealth building requires. The most successful people are ruthlessly selective about their relationships. They only work with people they genuinely respect and admire. If they wouldn't enjoy having dinner with someone, they don't do business with them, regardless of how attractive the deal appears. This seems extreme until you realize that life is too short to spend time with people who drain your energy or compromise your values. Your relationships are investments that require maintenance. You can't ignore them for years and expect them to thrive. You have to show up. You have to be present. You have to give before you expect to receive. Here's something that nobody tells you until it's too late. Success without people to share it with is hollow. You can build all the wealth in the world, but if you've sacrificed every meaningful relationship to get there, what exactly have you won? The people who matter most aren't the ones who can help your career. They're the ones who make life worth living regardless of your bank balance. Let's talk about work itself. Because most people approach career decisions backwards. They chase titles, prestige, or salary without asking the fundamental questions that actually determine whether they'll be happy. Here are 3 principles that should guide every career decision. First, don't sell anything you wouldn't buy yourself. Don't recommend anything you don't believe in. Don't advocate for anything you think is wrong. The moment you compromise your integrity for a paycheck, you've traded something irreplaceable for something replaceable. Second, don't work for people you don't respect. Life is too short to spend it taking orders from people whose judgment you don't trust. Third, work only with people you genuinely enjoy. When you find work that checks all 3 boxes, it stops feeling like work. It becomes something you do even if the pay was less. And that's when you do your best work. Your reputation is built slowly and destroyed quickly. It takes decades to establish trust and one catastrophic decision to lose it all. This means you need to guard your reputation like it's your most valuable asset, because in the long run, it is. Your reputation determines who wants to work with you, who trusts you with opportunities, who believes you when things get difficult. Money can be rebuilt. Reputation is far more fragile. Here's something that sounds boring but is profoundly true. Simple approaches almost always work better than complicated ones. Yet smart people hate simplicity because it doesn't feel impressive. So they add complexity to feel clever, and complexity is where everything breaks down. The most successful wealth builders keep their strategies almost embarrassingly simple. They find businesses they understand, run by people they trust, at prices that make sense. No complex derivatives, no financial engineering, just straightforward value creation year after year. There's no prize for making things difficult. You don't get extra credit for using sophisticated strategies. In fact, you often get penalized because complexity introduces more points of failure. Every additional variable is another thing that can go wrong, another system that needs monitoring, another potential mistake waiting to compound into disaster. Simple systems are robust. They're easier to understand, easier to manage, easier to fix when something inevitably breaks. And over the long run, robust beats clever every single time. This brings us to something critical. The power of saying no. Most opportunities are actually bad opportunities disguised as good ones. And every time you say yes to something, you're saying no to everything else you could be doing with that time and money. The question isn't whether something is a good opportunity. The question is whether it's the best possible use of your limited resources. Most of the time, the answer is no. The art of building wealth is knowing what to ignore. There's an infinite number of things you could do, could invest in, could spend time on. Your job isn't to do everything. It's to do the few things that truly matter and ignore everything else. Saying no is a skill that requires practice. It's uncomfortable at first because it feels like you're missing out. But as you get better at it, you realize that focused effort on a few important things will always outperform scattered effort across many mediocre things. The more successful you become, the more opportunities will come your way, and most of them will be distractions. Your ability to say no will determine how far you ultimately go. Let's address something that people always postpone until it's too late. Health. Your body is the only asset you can't replace. You can rebuild your career. You can make more money. You can start over in a new city. But you only get one body and one brain. If you destroy them, you're finished. Yet people treat their health like it's infinitely renewable. They work themselves into exhaustion, skip sleep, eat poorly, never exercise, and assume they'll fix it later. But later never comes, or by the time it does, the damage is permanent. You don't get to be old and healthy by accident. You get there through small, boring decisions made consistently over decades. Nothing glamorous, nothing complicated, just eating reasonably, moving regularly, sleeping adequately, and managing stress. Health compounds just like wealth. The good habits you build now will pay dividends for the rest of your life, and the bad habits will exact costs you can't even imagine yet. What good is financial success if you're too sick to enjoy it? What good is wealth if you're miserable? The real success is being functional and sharp for as long as possible. And that starts with decisions you make today. Let's talk about regrets, because understanding regret can help you avoid it. Most regrets aren't about things you did. They're about things you didn't do. Opportunities you were too cautious to take. Risks you should have accepted but refused. Relationships you let fade away. Experiences you postponed indefinitely. Fear keeps us from trying things, from taking chances, from putting ourselves out there. And that fear has a cost that compounds over time. Eventually you realize all the moments you missed, all the people you never connected with, all the adventures you never took because you were playing it safe. So take the risk. Ask the question. Make the move. If it doesn't work out, at least you'll know. At least you won't spend the rest of your life wondering what might have been. The things you don't do will haunt you more than the things you try and fail at. This doesn't mean being reckless. It means being thoughtful about what you might regret more. The temporary discomfort of trying, or the permanent regret of never knowing. Here's what all of this comes down to. Building wealth isn't about being the smartest person in the room. It's about being patient when others are frantic. It's about learning constantly while others assume they know enough. It's about admitting mistakes while others defend them. It's about living below your means while others inflate their lifestyles. It's about choosing relationships carefully while others collect contacts. It's about doing work that matters while others chase titles. It's about keeping things simple while others add complexity. It's about saying no often while others say yes to everything. It's about protecting your health while others sacrifice it. And it's about taking meaningful risks while others either gamble recklessly or hide completely. None of this is complicated, but it's incredibly hard because it requires discipline that most people simply don't have. It requires thinking long-term in a short-term world. It requires patience in an age of instant gratification. It requires simplicity when everyone celebrates complexity. The principles that build lasting wealth are boring. They're slow. They don't make exciting stories. But they work. They've worked for generations. And they'll work for you if you're disciplined enough to follow them. The goal isn't to die rich. The goal is to live well, to build something meaningful. To go to bed each night knowing you spent your day on things that actually mattered. To look back decades from now and think that you made the right choices, even when they were difficult. Time is the only resource you can't get more of. At your age, you still have plenty of it. Don't waste it chasing empty achievements. Don't spend it on things that don't create real value. Figure out what enough looks like for you and build a life around that principle. Be patient with your timeline. Be rational with your decisions. Be kind to the people who matter. Keep learning. Own your mistakes. Protect your health. Say no to distractions. And build something that lasts. That's the path. It's not exciting. It's not glamorous. But it's real. And if you follow it consistently over decades, you'll end up in a place that most people only dream about. Not because you were smarter or luckier, but because you understood principles that most people know but refuse to follow. If you found value in this perspective, show your support by liking this video. Drop a comment sharing which principle resonated with you most. And subscribe to this channel for more insights on building wealth, thinking clearly, and avoiding the mistakes that derail most people. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.